Hello, and welcome back to our study of the book of Daniel. My name is Laura Ankrum, and I'm glad you're joining me as we dig deeper into this fascinating book of both history and prophecy. Your assignment this week is to read Daniel chapter 3. If you attended church as a child, you might remember this account of Daniel's three friends as they defy King Nebuchadnezzar only to be thrown into a fiery furnace. They come out unscathed, proving the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is far superior to any idol ever created by man. When we first began our study of Daniel, I pointed out the importance of understanding how a particular book of the Bible fits into the overall story of Scripture. We reviewed the overall story using some pictures to help us recall the major sections of the Bible. And today, as we look at this familiar Sunday school story, we need to go back to recall a very similar story and then look forward into the future to see how all this ties together with what is coming next. So, first, let's take a look back. We called the third period of Bible history early history. You should remember that it covers Adam and Eve's children and their rebellion against God. They were selfish, they abused one another, and they even killed one another. This period also includes another familiar story about the Tower of Babel. As a reminder, you can turn back to Genesis 11, verses 1 through 8 to read this story. It's a story where mankind rebels against God by ignoring his command to disperse throughout the land. They instead decide to establish a city, and they begin erecting a tower that will reach heaven. And here's the key: they're doing this in order to make a name for themselves. Their tower is built on a plain, probably so that it's visible for a long distance. Now you can see the arrogance of this goal. Their desire was not to honor God, but to honor themselves. And there are some similarities to their story and what happens in Daniel chapter 3. Both stories involve mankind building a tall structure in order to elevate themselves. And in Nebuchadnezzar's case, he builds a 90-foot golden statue. And then he has the audacity to order everyone in the kingdom to worship this statue. Nebuchadnezzar's statue is reminiscent of a dream that he had back in Daniel chapter 2. Now, there are some differences between his statue and the statue that he dreamed about. Notably, his statue was made entirely of gold, whereas in the dream, the statue was made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. He probably built this statue in a desperate attempt to unify the kingdom and prevent the prophecy from coming true. They were the actions of a desperate man trying to hold on to power and fortune. And in Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar is very careful to say that it is a statue that he made. The statue is mentioned 11 times in Daniel 3, and 10 of those times it is referred to as the statue the king set up. I hope you didn't miss this repetition. It underlines the arrogance of King Nebuchadnezzar. He himself has created a God worthy of the worship of everyone in the entire kingdom? That doesn't sound right. And what does he say to the Jewish men? Let's look at Daniel 3:15. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be thrown into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can rescue you from my hands? If we look at both of these stories, we begin to get a really good definition of idolatry, even for our modern age. Idolatry is exchanging the glory of God for any other created thing. Doesn't really matter what the created thing is, it will always fall short. And Romans 1, verses 20 through 23 really expands on this. So let's read that. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, being understood by what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they, mankind, knew God, they did not honor God or give thanks, but they became futile in their reasonings, and their senseless hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible mankind, of birds, four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. As you can see in this passage in Romans, idolatry is not just worshiping a golden statue. It's an attitude of not honoring God and exchanging the glory of God for something that is corruptible. That corruptible thing, whether it's a golden statue or oneself, will never measure up to the glory and greatness of God. Our modern sensibilities would never have us bow to a bird, a four-footed animal, or a crawling creature. We are much more inclined to be like Nebuchadnezzar, enamored with ourselves to the point of elevating ourselves to some godlike level. And as we look to the future, this is exactly the attitude that we will see in the coming Antichrist. In speaking of the prelude to the second coming of Jesus, the day of the Lord, Paul describes a coming world ruler who we refer to as the Antichrist. Here Paul calls him the man of lawlessness, the son of destruction, and Paul describes his attitude. Turn to 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 4. This is what it says. This Antichrist opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. This man, the Antichrist, not only opposes every God, he exalts himself above every God. And to make matters worse, he will set himself up as a god in the Jewish temple. It's the same attitude of Babel. It's the same attitude of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 3. It's the attitude of exalting oneself over God. We see even more similarities when we turn to Revelation 13. Revelation 13 promises that a day is coming where a new image will be set up, and all those who do not worship it will be put to death. Does this sound familiar? It sounds exactly like the decree that Nebuchadnezzar gave. Worship the statue I built or die. Throughout the Bible, we see idolatry rearing its ugly head. In the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they courageously stood firm to worship the only true God. As we look toward the future, we know that one day an Antichrist with the same attitude as Nebuchadnezzar will walk onto the world scene. The choice that day will be the same: honor God or face death. But for today, for now, this story should challenge us to examine our own hearts. Are we honoring God and giving glory to Him and Him alone? Or are we more inclined to exalt ourselves over God? That's a good question all of us need to answer. Are we more like Daniel's friends or Nebuchadnezzar?